All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining Cocoon Data's CMMC 2.0 Industry Review, hosted by Mr. Jack Gumtow and Kevin Homer. My name is Marcellus Holly. I'll be your MC for the day. I'm the Director of Business Development over at Cocoon Data, and we have a good discussion set up for you today to really talk about CMMC 2.0, the changes, and also industry trends. So thank you all again for joining. Just a few housekeeping items. So this webinar is being recorded, so no worries there. We'll make sure that everyone has access to the recording following the webinar. It'll run for about 45 minutes, give or take, and we'll leave space for questions at the end. So please utilize the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and I'll be filtering through to make sure we can get as many questions answered at the end, all right? All right, introducing our two speakers. Today we are joined by Mr. Jack Gumtow. He is the former CIO for both the Naval Intelligence and the DIA with 34 years of total government and military service. Mr. Gumtow spent 6 years as a U.S. Marine and 4 years as a defense contractor. And he's currently the VP of Customer Solutions at MetroStar and is focused on delivering meaningful capabilities to the federal government and is also a member of Cocoon Data's advisory board. So thank you for joining, Mr. Gumtow, and thank you for your service as well. Next, we have Kevin Homer. He is the Vice President of the Americas at Cocoon Data. Kevin has 20 years of experience growing software companies and was the 20th employee at Logarithm and has built successful sales programs across the US and Latin America. So thanks for joining, Kevin. All right, so Kevin, I will go ahead and pass the mic over to you and let you lead this thing.
Thanks, Marcellus, appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. I just think it's a good place to start just to do a general level set on where we are, because a lot's happened here recently. So in January of 2020, the Department of Defense released the framework for CMMC 1.0, and the market had been operating under those guidelines since that time. Then earlier this month, CMMC 2.0 was released, and it's caused quite a stir in the industry. So the AB had always said that changes were coming, but many were surprised, I think, at what those changes were. So it's been an interesting last few weeks, to say the least, from C3PAOs to RPOs, LTPs and LPPs. And then there are the vendors that are looking to get certified under CMMC so that they can continue to do business with the defense industrial base once CMMC is finalized. So these changes have affected these organizations differently and will direct our mission going forward. So if you're looking at the slide that's up here, I thought it might be good just to kind of quickly review this. I'm sure most of you have seen it, right? But there's a lot of different opinions on what's happened here. And that's really why we're here today, is to hear from Jack, who has all the experience that Marcellus had mentioned. So something about this graphic that I found really interesting, and I wanted to share just in case anybody missed it, is the color schemes that are on here are not accidental. Okay, so if you look at what's changed, and there's a lot of information that's on the screen here, the purple to purple, right? Level 1 to level 1, the orange goes away, there's no level 2. Then the level 3 aligns with level 2 with green to green. Level 4 is going away, and then level 5 now becomes level 3. So you can see the different things on the right in terms of, you know, what these mean from a practice perspective under the model, and then what the different assessments are going to look like for each organization as well. So it's really kind of just a high level overview. There's obviously a lot more information than this that's involved with that, but this graphic I just think is really well put together in terms of understanding initially just what the changes mean. So just to kind of tee this up, Jack, and get your general thoughts here, you know, what do you see as this when you look at this graphic and what you know about the market in general, just what do you see as really, what jumps out at you as really the initial high level changes that are being made to the regulation?
Yeah, Kevin, thanks for having me, and Marcellus as well for that introduction. So the biggest thing that jumps out at me when I look at this, and there's a couple of other diagrams that are out there as well, is the elimination of the process aspect from 1.0 to 2.0. So 2.0 is all focused on practices and not worrying about those process components. When I was in the Intel community, which was my entire adult life, and we went through a number of cyber inspections. In general, it had always been the practices. Do you have your infrastructure secure to meet the requirements? In the last couple of years, they started rolling back in the process aspect to say, are your operations mature in order to meet the requirements? And that was a really difficult area for us to pass. I never failed an inspection. I know people that have, but it was the process component, and I never really saw the value added on that process aspect as opposed to the practice. Are you securing your data? Is your endpoint secure? Personnel, reduction of or elimination of lateral movement if you get inside the network, which would get into a whole nother topic, which would be zero trust and how to stop that. But those were really critical. The process piece, we never saw a lot of value in that. We did it because we had to do it, but we just squeaked by on that aspect. And in this case, 2.0 eliminates that process piece and let's focus on what is really critical to the Department of Defense in securing data. And that is the 110 controls from NIST 800.171 that is put into place. And so, Kevin, I think that's really the biggest part that jumps out at me is beyond, I mean, we could talk about level, going from 5 levels to 3 and really keeping, level 1, level 3, and level 5 and just renaming them. But I think to me, it's the elimination of process, getting down to that which is just critical. And then the other part is the self-assessment, which doesn't really come out in this slide. It's on it. You can see it over on the right-hand side on annual self-assessment for level 1. And it's self-assessment for level 2, unless there's a lot of critical national security or CUI in level 2. That doesn't jump out on the slide, but we know that is part of what's happening here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I know that we've discussed that a little bit in terms of what that means. And there is, I think that the framework for the 1.0 release really took the self assessments away to a certain extent and was trying to make that more formal of a process. So what are your thoughts just in general about that coming back in? And it's not necessarily a straightforward answer, right? It could be some good and some bad and things like that, because a big part of what's happened here, since January of 2020, where some of the small to medium businesses really looking at this and feeling like they were potentially getting squeezed a little bit because it was a little bit expensive to get assessed through the original CMMC model. So what are your thoughts on the self-assessment? Is it a good decision to do that? Is it bad? Is it somewhere in the middle? Is there a challenge to the SMB space out of this? What are your thoughts on that?
So there's pros and cons of the self-assessment. On the con side is I've seen in government practice, people assess themselves beyond what they really were. So that's a polite way of saying they misled the assessors. Right? What CMMC is trying to do on that is use the law to get back and say, look, if you, I'm thinking about how to put this in the right way. If you mislead the government, there's a law out there. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but it talks about the Fraudulent Claims Act, I think is the name of that. Right? Is that they can then come prosecute you after the fact if you fraudulently claim that you have met a CMMC level act on it. The question really becomes then, will they? And I don't know the answer to that. It depends on the criticality of the information, especially if it's leaked, because that's generally what would happen. Is you would look at if a company was breached and data was stolen and that data was critical, they're going to do an after action report and recreate what happened. If it comes back at that point that you misled or fraudulently claimed that you were compliant, I suspect you're going to get prosecuted at that point. So in one sense, I personally don't believe that self-assessment should be utilized because there's just too much room for misusing the ability to self-assess. On the flip side of that, it is incredibly difficult and expensive for companies, especially small companies, to actually go get CMMC certified. Not only do you have to do all the work up front to understand your infrastructure and your data, where it is and how it's secured and so forth, you have to document it, and then you have to pay for a third party to access it. So I can see both sides of it. What I really hope is that people take this seriously and say, look, I need to secure my data. Why is that? I mean, you can't turn the news on anymore without seeing there's a cyber breach somewhere. Somebody's done something. Data's been stolen. You know, I was one of the people that got the OPM breach with my SF86 data that tells you everything about everything in my life was stolen a few years back. Why is that? You know, we all ought to be just securing our data, securing our critical information, securing those crown jewels of the company, your secret sauce, regardless of some mandate by the government. You should want to do that anyhow. And so the framework is, I think the framework's excellent, using the NIST controls to help walk you through as a checklist. Am I secure or am I not secure? Am I going to be able to do that? And if not, how am I going to mitigate this? Where am I going to put my critical data? Regardless of it's CUI data from the government, it could be your own internal critical data, that, you know, proprietary data you don't want out. What are you going to do with that? How are you going to secure that? And in the interim, you're going to then self-attest that you've done that. So I see both sides of it, but I lean heavily on the side of I'd like to see third-party assessments, and I lean on people ought to be doing the right thing because it's more than just protecting the government data, it's protecting your own company's data as well.
Yeah, that's great. And I believe it is the False Claims Act is what you're talking about. And, you know, of course, a part of this too, though, I think they're trying to meet somewhere in the middle, is the fact that the executive teams for the companies that are self-assessing have to provide a statement here that they're signing off on this. So it reminds me of the old Sarbanes-Oxley movement back 20 years ago, where organizations can't just claim that they didn't know that, you know, the top of the food chain was like, well, that was below my pay grade. So when this information is being submitted now, it's got to go all the way up the chain. And I can picture the CEOs of the organization looking at the person running their self audits and saying, you sure this is good? Because it's my name that's going on that document. So at least there's some accountability that they have there, which kind of leads into another question here. So if you look at the level 2, it's a triennial third-party assessments for the critical national security information. What are your thoughts about the frequency of that? And this will kind of maybe open up any thought process of anything else you feel like that they should add or change. Do you think that you know, once every 3 years, is that enough? Should they change the frequency of that?
So I'm a little bit biased on this because in the government, that's how we were inspected, once every 3 years, roughly. And the rationale behind that is the volume. So how do you assess that many companies out there? There's somewhere between 200 and 300,000 companies in the defense industrial base. I don't know what the percentage is that will have a level 3 or a level 2 with critical national information, CUI data that's in there. But if it's 40 or 50,000, so total, and you hit them once every year, that's still 12 to 15,000 companies per year that are being inspected. And it never ends. It's the gift that keeps on giving. Right? So you're going to continue doing this once every 3. If you did it every year, I mean, 300 to 400,000, that's an incredible amount of work that's in there. And I don't know how you're going to get there. And so I do lean on the side that once every 3 years is probably appropriate. And I think having that False Claims Act, where the executives, in a sense, have the fiduciary role that you would on a board that says, I am now responsible for this, and can be held liable. I think having them sign off on that, whether it's the CISO or the CEO or the COO, it is a good way of holding them accountable, in addition to the once every 3 years.
That's great. Is there anything else? I hate to put you on the spot here, but when you look at the regulations, right? So even starting at 1.0, right, that came out, and then the changes with 2.0. When you've looked at this and followed it along the way, are there things that you thought that is either missing from what's been there, or shouldn't be there and should be removed? Just in your experience, is there something that the organization should consider when things are going to become final? It's like, I really hope that they have this as part of it, because I think it's really important.
Yeah, so there's 110 controls that are identified in 800.171 and 172. I think it's pretty difficult to meet all those controls. Even in the environment that I previously worked, we generally never met all the controls that were assigned to us. And there were a lot of reasons for that. Some, it was just unattainable. Some, you couldn't get there on all systems because the OS on the system was old enough that you couldn't make the changes, you couldn't patch it correctly. There were other ways to do it. You could put it behind a device so that it could not be seen necessarily, or protected, or firewalled off. And then sometimes you just couldn't get there. And then in the last category was, and this goes with like patching, STIG patching as well. If you implement everything a STIG says, if you implement every one of these controls, sometimes your infrastructure won't work. The system won't work. The capability will no longer work. And you've got to write an exemption for it. So I think people need to be aware that it's going to be rare that you're going to hit all 110 controls, but you can document that. Be very clear about why, and have somebody sign off on that. The one thing, Kevin, that I'm not a big fan of is POANMs. So you can do a POANM that says, hey, these controls, I'm not able to meet right now, but I expect them to be able to meet them within, in this case, 6 months, right? And here's how I'm going to get there. Historically, POAMs have been used as a way of procrastination. So, yeah, I can't meet it. I really don't have an intention of meeting, but I'll put it in this POANM and go away for 3 years. And then when you get ready to be inspected again, it's like, oh, crap, now what are we going to do? How do I fix this? And if you hear in my voice some level of passion about that, that's because I live that world. Not only as the CIO for an intelligence agency, or for 2 different intelligence agencies, but also as a CISO at an intelligence agency. There were just times you can't meet all that, and putting a POANM, it allowed me to procrastinate. I don't know how to put more teeth into the POANM process. You have to do it in some cases. But it's a back door to get out of some of this, and I'm not a big fan of the POANM process.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying, and it's putting something in there. It almost allows you to say, we're not good at this, but this document says we're okay not being good at that, right? So, and it gets back to, I think, the number of organizations that are looking to get certified under this regulation, right? So I've heard numbers start at 300,000, go up to 400,000. I mean, who knows what the actual number is? So tracking that, and if you have that many that are out there, it's difficult to then follow up and be like, hey, just checking in. How are you doing on that deficiency you said you were going to have fixed this week? So it's a lot to keep track of.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's the number. This is something that's going to individuals are going to have to track. The CEOs, quite frankly, ought to be tracking, saying, hey, I'm concerned. So, hey, CISO, you put a POA&M together that said you're not going to meet these 27 controls on this that we need to meet. What's your process? And you know what? On our weekly stand-ups or bi-weekly stand-ups, you need to put out a chart that says, here's our progress that we've made on this, and here's when we're going to be done with that. And oh, by the way, you better be done because it's in your evaluation plan by the end of that assessment period. Because as a CEO of my company, I want to make sure that I am secure and nobody's coming in. I'm going to do everything I can to prevent the loss of data, period.
Yeah, I think a big part of that, it's really interesting you bring that up, and maybe this is a segue to the next topic here, is that, well, I think one of the biggest challenges that the market faces is the different appetites that are out there for security. You have some organizations where the executive team, really cares a ton. And they're like, man, we're going to try to lead the market and set the bar for security. And you have others that think it's, whatever, we're just going to do the bare minimum and things like that. I think it's really important that organizations, step up and really step to the plate. If you're talking about other industries, you can get away with that a little bit more, but in the industry we're playing in, it's pretty important that everybody, really step up and do that. So I know something that you've been passionate about here is, the implications of organizations not having a secure framework to date. Did you want to talk about that and the challenges of getting from A to B?
Yeah, so Kevin, the organizations range in size and complexity, right? And so a small organization still could be doing critical national defense work. But since they're small, they don't have the necessary resources to implement all those controls. So I'll stick a firewall up between my infrastructure and the internet, just kind of prevent, but that's not going to really get you there. So they've got to ask themselves, I don't think it's really a matter of, do I believe in security or not believe in security? I think everybody believes in security anymore. They've seen too many hacks happen, too many breaches happen, too much data that's been stolen. We've seen the Chinese go from way behind us, years behind us, technically, to in some cases leapfrogging us based on the stealing of information from DIB companies that host this information. If you look at some of their weapon systems, you scratch your head and say, wow, that really looks pretty damn close to what we have in the U.S. arsenal. How'd that happen? So I think everybody is really, I'm going to go off that everybody pretty much believes that security is relevant and I need to do what I can do based on my resources. The question then becomes, how do you do that if you're a smaller company? How do I implement the appropriate security and protect that data? You can do it by having a team in-house that is continuously monitoring. There's a cyber team, not only monitoring, but adjusting, patching, updating. You got to stay aware of what the threat is, what's coming in, and to the extent you can, stay even with it. It's really difficult to stay ahead of it, especially as a smaller company. Or do you use a third party to implement and push some of that critical data to? So if you don't have the infrastructure to do that, if you don't have the cyber team to do that, another option is to use a third party to say, I'm going to take my critical data, whatever that means, whether it's CUI, whether it's secret sauce, whether it's my personnel data, and I'm going to put that into somebody else, and then I'm going to focus instead of the controls for protecting the data, I'm going to set on the controls for accessing that data. So am I using a secure framework to reach that data, interact with that data, store that data, and transmit that data versus doing this all myself? I think there's a market for doing that because I think a lot of companies just can no longer afford to do what's necessary to protect their data because they're going to, when I was a CISO and a CIO, I used to tell my guys, look, it's not if you're going to get hacked, it's when you're going to get hacked. And then how is it we're going to recover from that? And no matter what industry you're in, you're vulnerable. I don't think there's any industry anymore that's not vulnerable for being breached.
Yeah, I think that, the old saying is the fact that the only organizations that say they haven't been hacked are the ones that are being dishonest. So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, right?
Or they don't know they're being hacked or they've been breached.
Right. Yeah, the SMB space, especially, so we've got those organizations tend to have one person who's the director of IT, the director of compliance, and the director of security. And I can't tell you how many calls we've had over the years with that person calling in a panic saying, what's this regulation I'm supposed to know something about when I've got 17 laptops on my desk that need to be fixed here, that people are waiting because they got to get back to work and things like that. So it's obviously a big challenge in the space. So with that, I don't know if we want to switch here, Marcellus, or any questions that have come in and things that people are asking here would like to know, either from Jack or myself. Marcellus, you on mute?
Sorry about that. What was that?
So I was saying that, at this point here, we're at the bottom of the hour. We have about 15 minutes left. I don't know if there are any questions that have come in that we could ask Jack, or if anybody has anything about Cocoon Data they want to know about, either one.
Yeah, we have a couple that I hear starred, ready to go. So one, does putting your information in a Gov cloud meet the protection requirements?
I mean, I think that's a fair question. I don't know on the GovCloud I've not done a mapping of the inherited controls out of the GovCloud to the CMMC or the NIST 800.171 control. The answer would be it'd take you a long way there. It's funny because one of the things Kevin and I talked about several months ago when I first met him was, if you use the government cloud and those sets of controls, how secure is that? And my answer to him at the time was, and he took this a little bit tongue in cheek, but was, yeah, in the world I come from, I would only put my shopping list, my grocery list up in there, because of the data that I lived in was everything we did was critical national intelligence information. I would never put any of that information in that environment. Not only would policy not allow it, it's just everything can be hacked anymore. So as secure as you think you are, you have to be prepared to be breached. So you've got to put as much controls in as you can to secure the data. I'm a big fan of encryption of data at rest and data in motion. Most people don't do that because there's overhead that's associated with that, and there's costs associated, and so forth. But if you get hacked, if your data is stolen and it's encrypted, and you're using a Type 1 encryption, you're pretty good, unless it's a nation state that took that data. That data is not going to be read. So you got hacked, okay, the data got stolen, great, but it was totally encrypted. So I think there's ways of mitigating some of these things. There's smart ways to do that, but I don't think in the normal day-to-day business of what we're doing, we're all busy. We get asked to push data and send data. How many times have you sent your PII data in the clear? Are your tax forms sitting on your hard disk on your computer at home? Lots of people say, "Oh no, I would never do that." The reality is they do it. People do it all the time. And some of it is just because we get caught up in the day-to-day activities. So how do you do that more securely? I'm still going to harken back to using a third party. It is a good way to do it. Encrypting the data in motion, essentially inherit somebody else's controls to help you protect yourself. And that goes right back to your question, Marcellus, which is, does the GovCloud and that provide? That would be a matter I'd have to do the mapping across the city. It does give you some. You're always going to inherit sets of controls, but there's always more. Even when I used the cloud and when I was at DIA, you inherit a number of controls from it, but we still implemented our own security on top of all that for the various levels of data that we had.
Yeah, I think you said it perfect, mitigating risk, right? Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Marcellus. Because I laughed when you said the grocery store list, because I remember the first time we talked, you made that comment. I got a kick out of it. So I think that so you were dealing with classified information, right? Where you were. This is, CUI and FCI is a lot of what the vendors are working with, which obviously is a little bit different when you're coming to GovCloud. You can store that information there. What I've heard from folks is it's really, you can't just put it in Joe's bait shop.govcloud.com, right? It has to be, certain approved vendors, the big boys, Amazon and Microsoft, Google, those guys are more acceptable places to do that. So that's interesting. Marcellus, I got a question that came in here, if you don't mind me asking, because I think it's a good one.
Yeah.
And Jack, we had talked about this ironically as well before. It has to do with, CUI versus FOUO. So people are talking about, the old school FOUO classification. And does that information, is that now directly mapped to CUI and I have to go back in time and find all the FOUO things? And do we sort through that and decide what goes over? Like, what's your approach between those two things here? How would you handle that if you were a CISO?
So, well, I was a CISO before, and during the pandemic, I was the CIO, and the CISO worked for me. So, at that time, we rarely did anything on the unclassified environment. I mean, it just was not something we did other than for administrative purposes on some things. Everything we did was within a classified realm. Pandemic hits. All of a sudden, I'm sending 84% of my workforce home the next day. And then splitting the remaining 16% into two blue and gold teams. And so I only had 8% of my workforce worldwide in at any given time. So the rest were at home. So what do you have to, you have to use the unclassified venue. So the questions really came up about, well, what do you do with CUI slant for official use only data? How do you deal with that? What does it really mean? What is official use only data? Right? And even though I'd been in the government for 30 some years at that point and dealing with in the intel community, it was still a struggle to really state clearly. I mean, you could read the legal definition of what those were, but how do you really apply that? So for me, it was easier to talk to my workforce in the sense of a litmus test. And the litmus test was, if I was sitting or standing in an airport and we had a group of people around me that my employees, if you will, or colleagues, and if I'm comfortable talking to them and having other people hear about it, it's not CUI or FOU. But if I question that, like, man, I don't really know if I want to have Marcellus hearing me talk about this, then let's assume that it's critical information, and that the other litmus test is, would you want this information showing up in the Washington Post? And that's an older one. If the answer is no, then assign it critical information. In the case of companies, do you want your competitors to know your secret sauce? All that special aspect that you use. If you're okay with them seeing all that, then I wouldn't call it critical. But if so, categorize it as such. I mean, I don't want to get into the legal definition because it gets confusing about CUI, FOUO, et cetera. Really, I think the better way of looking at it is it meaningful to you, and is it something you don't want released to the general public or to the competitors or somebody else? If that's the case, you need to protect it. And you ought to be doing what you can to protect that. Even as Jack Gumtow sitting in his house at home, my critical information I have protected separately. It's not online because I don't want my tax forms out there for people to read. There's just a host of information I'm not okay with people having access to or getting access and then exploiting it.
Great.
Yeah.
Great answer.
Good. I got another one here. How does CMMC 2.0 affect Cocoon Data?
I'm going to let Kevin answer that one.
I guess I'll take that one. So it's a good question because it's, like I mentioned at the beginning, it's affecting everyone differently. And it's been interesting to talk to the market and kind of just hear how everyone's being affected. From our perspective, I think it actually ends up helping us. And there's a lot of things that I like about this. I mean, it's, working with a lot of small to medium businesses, right? We also work with some enterprise folks too. Seeing that, I think that there was a problem in terms of some organizations that we talked to felt like they couldn't afford it to be able to continue doing the business that they were doing, right? Cocoon Data and what we're doing, it actually increases the percentage of the practices that we are able to address. So by the reduction in the total number of practices, our percentage that we address now has gone up to 31% from 29 it was earlier. So it positions us well. Everyone's still, at the end of the day, if you think about what the mission is of the entire regulation, it's really to protect your critical data and to protect the nation's critical data. I mean, that's never changed, right? That will always be there and never go away. So that's really our mission. So fortunately for us, it really hasn't had any kind of a negative impact at all.
That's great. Appreciate that. We still have a few more minutes left. Please feel free to drop over any more questions. Kevin, is there anything else you have a few minutes you wanted to ask that you weren't able to get to maybe?
There's a question that came in here. And again, these are always fun, Jack, because you're the one that gets put on the spot, not me, right? So the question came in, it says, at what point does the federal government yield federal cybersecurity mandates like CMMC to market force mandates, such as mandates from insurance companies?
That's a great question, right? With the number of cyber attacks you can buy cyber insurance now. I don't know if that's the right answer, right? I think the two of them coming together or supporting each other is the right answer. So market factors can help drive you in that direction. I mean, here, protect your critical data, not necessarily the government data, but you need to protect that. But I think the federal government needs to still have a policy in place that says, this is my expectations. If you want to do business with me, here's my expectations. You're going to secure our data, not your data. It's the government's data or for whatever entity that you're working with. You need to protect that. And I don't think market conditions alone are sufficient. I think they help get there. They help you address the issues that you want to attack, such as your own information. But the government still has a place to say, you will do this. If you want to do business, if you don't want to do business, go find something else. Go work in the commercial industry with another commercial partner. But if you want to do it with us, you got to secure our data, and here are the requirements to support that.
You always go sell hot dogs in the park, right?
That's it. Just
absolutely.
So Marcellus, I think we got about 5 minutes left. You want to wrap up?
Yeah, absolutely. So no more questions as of now, but we'll go ahead and get over to the final slide here. So look, thank you all for attending. Jack, Kevin, thank you all for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge. I learned a lot from it. And just to give the viewers here a little more of an overview of who we are at Cocoon Data, what we do, and more importantly, how we kind of solve some of the issues that were spoken here today. So Cocoon Data, we have a military-grade secure file sharing application, right? So it not only enables secure file storage, but also collaboration. So for those who need to have their CUI, FCI, or just company-sensitive data that Jack was referring to, with $15 a user a month, minimum of 3 licenses, users get a terabyte of storage in the AWS GovCloud, right? Which is FedRAMP certified garage. You're able to move all of that data over there. So, I mean, a couple of things that you said also, Kevin, with the SMB space, we found that the SMB space has been a home run, not only because it's affordable, but it's a 100% cloud-based solution, right? So it's a 0 footprint item. And with that terabyte of data, they can be confident that terabyte of storage, they can be confident their data is secure, right? So not only in the SMB space, but Kevin, you mentioned we have some customers in the enterprise level because we have multi-tenant capabilities, right? So under a private cloud master deployment, an enterprise company can have silo tenancies and be able to put their units under there and keep the data separate, which I think is super important with this CMMC regulation, right? So look, it's a great application, great tool. I can go on for days about it, but I think we should go ahead and wrap this up. But if anyone is interested in learning more, please feel free to reach out to our team over at info@Cocoon Data. Jack, thank you again for joining and sharing your knowledge. Kevin, thank you again. This has been great and looking forward to hopefully speaking more about this and hopefully not many more updates. So everyone have a great rest of the week, great day, and thank you all for joining.
Marcellus, Kevin, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jack. We appreciate you.
Bye, everyone.